Hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. This is my favorite topic in the world, and I'm so grateful that Adorama invited me to do this presentation. And I was putting it together this morning, just thinking a lot about exactly the kind of message that we need to communicate on a day like today, in a time like this. And so what I really want to sort of communicate today is a multi-layered message of how we can be creating during this time, and specifically what that looks like for everybody, no matter what you do, no matter what kind of art you make or what style your art is. So I'm really excited to just dive in and show you a little bit of my world and what that looks like. I left a message in the live chat just saying that if anybody has any questions or comments, or you want to start a dialogue together, I will be, if I look off over here, it's because I've got my laptop up and I'm looking at all of the comments coming in. So I will be monitoring that, or at least attempting to, during the next hour or so. And I would love to be able to take questions ahead of time. So if you have a question where you're like, I really hope she talks about this, write question in all caps beforehand, so that if I need to scroll back at the end to see the questions, then I'll see it really, really easily. So go ahead and just put question and then say whatever your question is, or comment, or whatever it is. Yeah, I'm really excited. So we're going to jump in, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit about my world and what that looks like. So today we're talking about self-portraiture, and what that means is, of course, capturing yourself in an image or any other way. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this in particular is because a lot of us are at home. A lot of us don't have access to the resources that we normally have access to. But for me, this is just like everyday life. Like I live in quarantine by choice, and I love it. And I love being by myself and working by myself. And that's just life for me. So I wanted to share a little bit of, how we might take that spirit into our lives, no matter what they look like, and start creating from there. Slight disclaimer: if you hear screaming in the background, that's just my 2-year-old. Just ignore it. He's fine. And from there, we're going to jump in. So really excited to see everyone in the chat. So glad to see people from all over the world. That's really awesome. Okay. So I want to talk through a few questions that you guys may have about how to actually literally create self-portraits. And one of the ways that we can do that is to talk through the step-by-step process, which is very simple, actually. I'll share with you the gear that I use and some things that you might be able to get your hands on to make it a lot easier. And that's the first question that I see come in, is the best way of focusing a self-portrait. So I'm going to start to share some images with you as we go. And this first image that I wanted to share, which I'm about to get to this question of focusing a self-portrait, is specifically, I wanted to bring it up because this was an early image of mine. And I was using a camera that was partially broken. I was using a lens that did not autofocus. And so all of my self-portraits for years and years were done using manual focus. This is kind of a weird thing because most people just have lenses that autofocus and you don't really worry about getting yourself in focus. Because here's the thing: if you have a little remote control and you're standing in front of the camera when you trigger it, it will automatically search for focus wherever the focal point is set. So if the focal point is set in the middle, let's say, and you're standing in the middle, it will find you. And it's super, super simple to focus self-portraits these days. But if you have a lens that isn't finding you, or you're like in a weird spot in the frame, or it's just not working, you can always flip your lens to manual and just put something in your place. So carry an extra tripod with you. Like if you go to a thrift store or something, there are always tripods there that are missing the bases to them. And that's an awesome tool to just go get a really inexpensive tripod just to stick in your place. That's always a great tool because you can make it a lot taller than some other objects that you might be able to bring with you. And if you can make it really tall, then essentially what you're doing is you've got a stand-in that's your height and you can really focus there. Then you just go stand in its place. So that is one of the best ways to focus a self-portrait. But if you're like me and you're always short on tools and you just do things the hard way, because that's how you are, then you might be like me with this image that we're looking at here. For this image, I just focused on the wall. I just looked at the wall and tried to pick a spot on the wall to focus on and then hoped I stood in the right spot. And it's kind of soft, like it's not like a really, really crisp image, but that was okay for me at the time. It's okay anytime, honestly. So that's the full image there. And I wanted to share this because I made this image over a decade ago when I first started photography 11 years ago. And this was such a fun image for me, and it really marked a way of creating that I found extremely fulfilling. So I'm just looking at the chat here. Ooh. So somebody says, Duncan says, I appreciate the way that you work, but if you could do a portrait shoot with somebody else, who would it be? Man, that's a good question. Probably authors. Like authors, I love doing book covers, so I'll say that. Book covers are my jam, but I never get to photograph the author themselves, and I find authors to be, like fantasy authors, to be the coolest people in the world. So I've been in touch with some of my all-time favorite authors, and like my hope is that one day we'll get a photo shoot going together. Louise says, how do you manage to get away from your family and take your shots? I don't really. I just have a 2-year-old running around now these days. I also get up really early. So like, the sun's been coming up around 5 a.m. That's when I wake up most days. And I do a lot of my shoots in the dawn light, and that's really helpful. So that's kind of how I balance that. And then, let's see. Oh, I don't know how to say your name. Alsander. I hope I said that even remotely correctly. Says, I'm really curious about the conceptualization process. I'm an editor learning to create instead of modifying what's already there. Yeah, so I will go through my conceptualization process as we continue. And we'll definitely touch on that. So I wanted to share this image. I made this in 2009. And I was learning a lot about Photoshop, so I was like liquefying my face and doing all sorts of things. And there are so many things about the images that we create when we first start that we would never do now. I think a lot of us have that kind of reaction to our old work. And that's why I wanted to share it, because even with lesser tools than I have now, and even with no idea what you're doing when you're first starting out, it's possible to create what's in your imagination. And so that's what a lot of my images are just these sort of stumbling through the woods, lost and confused, trying to figure something out. When you create self-portraits, there is this huge sense of like, you feel like everybody's watching you, even though nobody's watching you when you start out. Like, you're really self-conscious about it. At least that's me. Anytime I'm out in the woods or out on a mountain or something like that, even if I feel totally alone, I start shooting and I think, is somebody watching me from the distance? Or like, what would they think if they saw me doing this? And one of my favorite things to remind myself is that nobody cares about us as much as we do, which is like kind of a sad thought, but mostly really freeing and really awesome with self-portraiture. So people ask me all the time, like this, for example, was shot in a really popular park in Los Angeles. And people ask me all the time, how did you feel comfortable shooting this with people walking all around you? And I didn't feel comfortable. It took me a long time to start to be comfortable with that. But once I realized that nobody cares about me as much as I do, I just started to realize that, like, at most, I'm just going to be someone's funny dinner time story that night, and that's it. And that's cool to be that for somebody else, to be interesting enough to cause a conversation. Okay, so let's see. Somebody says, Alessandro says, what coast are you on for the sunrise? I am not, well, I'm on the West Coast-ish. I'm in Arizona. And then to follow up to that, somebody says, what time is better for the portrait, sunrise or sunset? The truth is that it doesn't really matter to me. I think they're exactly the same. The only thing that matters is the direction of light, because I shoot during magic hour. So like this, for example, this image that you're looking at was shot during magic hour, meaning that the sun had already gone down or it hadn't come up yet. And that's when I always take my shots. But as you can see, there's a rim light around my hair. And that's because even though the sun was gone, there is still a direction to the light. So all you need to pay attention to is where the sun just set or where it's going to rise, so that when you take your photo, you know if it's going to come out looking backlit or front lit or side, etc. So let me show you a couple more. This was actually shot probably a 5-minute walk away from that last one. And this was, again, 11 years ago that I shot this. And I'm sharing all of these old images because I think it's really important to show where we start. I was doing a lot of experimenting at the time that I created these images. I did not know what I was doing. This is a technique that I have not used since I created this, with these direct pools of light coming in. This was an old, like, silo of some sort that's abandoned. And funny enough, I was shooting this self-portrait and I heard somebody scream outside of the silo, which is like kind of disconcerting. And I wondered if they had like looked in and saw me laying there in a bedsheet or something. But it turned out there was just a rattlesnake crawling around right outside the door. And I had to wait till it left so that I could leave safely. And people ask me a lot, like, aren't you afraid of creating works by yourself? Like, aren't there dangers associated with that? And there are, for sure. Especially now living in Arizona, people are constantly asking me about scorpions and snakes and stuff like that, which I have encountered. I've encountered several tarantulas and scorpions and stuff like that. But the really good thing about shooting a self-portrait is that you can't help but get into the creative flow of it. And so I say that's a good thing. It could be bad if something comes up and attacks you. But the good thing is that you learn to just shut out all of those fears that you have, and you just get into the flow of creating, because it requires that of you. Self-portraiture is all about doing and being in the moment and being focused on a million different tasks that you would usually have other people to help you with. Do we ever really know what we're doing? No. That's a great point, Robert. I love that. So we will probably talk about color grading toward the end, Philip, because I have 5 images pulled up in Photoshop, and we are going to take them apart and figure out how they were put together and go through some of my editing process. So definitely watch till the end if you are curious about my editing process and you want to see how certain images were made. I have all images pulled up that I created this year that we can take apart and look at. So a question has come up, which is, how do you compose your pictures? Do you have an idea and plan it before, or improvise? So this is the thing about self-portraiture, is that it can be really fun to improvise if you feel comfortable with your camera and you know the process of taking self-portraits. In the past, I've tried to improvise and it's been frustrating because it is really difficult to understand your frame and to know where you're going to be placed in that frame. But of course, that's how you learn, by just doing it a lot. So I am not in writing, I'm also a writer, and in writing, they call it pantsing, when you just fly by the seat of your pants. And I am not a pantser. Like, that is not me. I am very much a planner. I plan every photo shoot that I do. I plan it down to the color scheme that I want, the pose that I'll be doing, the wardrobe that I've chosen, the location. And I write extensively about theme per image. I write a poem per image. So I'm a real planner. Like, I really like to dive into that. So for me, it's about planning it and then trying to match the frame to my vision that I've already gotten. But for a lot of people, it's more fun to do it the other way. So I'm not, a proponent of one or the other, but that's how I do it. Okay, so there's the full image, which, again, like, there are things about this that I wouldn't do these days. Like, I wouldn't shoot graffiti, I wouldn't shoot those direct pools of light, but I was learning a lot in this image about how to create. I also do a lot of work that's very surreal and in many ways unrealistic. Again, this was shot 10 or 11 years ago. And I thought it was important to show that because I didn't know what I was doing here. And this is a great example of just playing. And so this is the full image. And I would do a lot of works in my little tiny apartment where I was just trying my best, as we all do. But, I didn't have resources. I was so socially anxious that I wouldn't go outside. I didn't want to talk to people. I just wanted to be alone. And so I stayed in my apartment all the time to create. I wouldn't really take any risks in terms of going out, getting props, stuff like that. So I had myself and whatever was in my house, in this case, a bunch of flour that I photographed just throwing it all over the place that I edited in. You can see that I'm just using window light here, just one light off to the side with light coming in. And that's how I created almost everything. Sorry, just reading the rattlesnake comment, that made me laugh. Oh, thank you, Snap Phase. That was nice. That's a technique I might try again, those direct pulls of light. We'll see. This is one of the first images that I made, like in the first week that I ever picked up a camera. I did not know what I was doing, but I had a lot of conceptual ideas, and so I shot this in my little apartment. This was shot in Philadelphia before I moved to a different state. And at this point, like, I seriously didn't know what I was doing. Like, I didn't understand any of my camera settings. I was shooting all on auto. I didn't know how to use Photoshop. I just had a vision. Like, I knew what I wanted it to look like. And I never really figured it out. So this is the full image. I never really figured it out because what I wanted for this picture was to be walking away into clouds. I never figured it out. So instead I just used a bunch of texture on my wall and I put some little birds up in the corner because I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, so, but I think that's where we all start. And to me, this goes back to the conceptualization idea, which is, do you conceptualize or do you, just see what happens? And for me, it's only because I conceptualized my images that I was able to start creating self-portraits, because I had guidance. I let my imagination do the work, and then I just tried to get my technical skills to match my imagination, which is a really awesome way of working if you're trying to fast track yourself to learning a lot of new skills fast. So that's what I did. I do shoot in the 1x1 format, square format, and I do that very intentionally. Oh boy, we can't even go there yet. We just got back it up. Sorry, I make myself laugh with these old images, so I don't know. It's weird that I'm just like laughing in my office by myself, but maybe you're laughing too. So yeah, I shoot everything square format, and I did that very intentionally from the beginning, from day one. I've never created an image that wasn't square format, and I did that because I actually really didn't like photography when I first started. I still actually don't really like photography that much. It's not like the most exciting art form to me in a lot of ways, but I love making them and I love doing it and I love being a photographer. But I just thought, I really want my images to look like paintings or just something that's not quite a photograph. And I thought that if I altered the traditional photographic ratio and I did squares, then you might be able to look beyond the fact that it's a photograph and maybe see something else in its place. So I've done them ever since, and I think it's super exciting. All right, here we go. So this is my sea monster picture. I think my face is turning red. I haven't shown this image like ever. And this is really funny. So I went out to the ocean and I just started taking pictures of myself like diving in the water as much as I could to create a sea monster photo. And I thought that I would throw this in because I am a big believer that no ideas are bad ideas, but I also know how to laugh at my old work and to just like, laugh at me trying to be serious about something when in fact it turned out like this. So I wanted to share that because it can be really intimidating to bring an idea to life when you're doing self-portraiture for so many reasons. Because not only are you trying to think about the story that you're telling and the emotion of the image, and you're trying to pose, but you're also trying to fix your hair and your wardrobe and click your camera and make sure the frame is right and think about the lighting. And it's really confusing. And so sometimes when we shoot, especially self-portraits, it is so nice to just forget about the message for a little while and just get the technique down. And then once you've got that technique, start to think about the concept. So if my way of creating is not resonating for you, where you're like, I don't want to think about the concept and then make something, do it the opposite way. And there's a great deal to be learned in that process. There's the whole image. I don't even know, you guys. Here we go. Oh boy. Sorry. Okay. So here's another image. You can see that this is really bad quality as far as images go. I'm well aware. I shot this with my little semi-broken camera. It was 12 megapixels at the time. And I didn't really get it in focus. I tried and it just didn't. And I was shooting in super low light. It was really grainy. My husband spent 2 hours saran wrapping me to the wall. I don't know if I recommend that you try that exactly, but it was an experience. And so I got saran wrapped to the wall. It was very traumatizing for some reason. I couldn't breathe, and I was getting really panicked, and my back hurt from standing still for so long. And by the time I took this picture, I wish that it was better resolution, because I had an actual tear running down my face because I was so upset. But that's the great thing about self-portraits, is that it creates these experiences for you that are memorable, that I can literally track the last decade of my life by these ridiculous experiences that I've had. So like, I remember this day so well, and I can't remember much about living in this apartment, but I remember making this image this day. It was one of the last images that I made in Philadelphia before I moved. It was really meaningful to me. So that's why I'm sharing this image. To me, an image doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be super crisp. Your eyes don't have to be in focus. That, for me, that's not the point. The point is that there's an emotion in this picture, and I captured it, and I'm happy about that. So that's how I create. Sorry, just read. Oh my gosh, I should have warned you. The most embarrassing picture I've ever made. Oh my gosh, I'm just having a good time over here. So, listen guys, if you ever think to yourself, it's gonna be a great idea to Photoshop my head onto a stick, it's probably not, as evidenced by this picture. This is like some next level self-portraiture, am I right? So I created this 11 years ago. I thought this was going to be very meaningful and beautiful and deep. And you know, that's what it was. It's just that. And this is my most embarrassing self-portrait. And I want to like give my husband a shout out, because all the while he was telling me like, this will be embarrassing when you look back on it. And it is. But it's also really funny and a good way to learn and grow, and to just be able to say, you know what, things change. I didn't know what was going on. Now I do, or at least I think I do. And I'm sure I'll be embarrassed of some things that I'm doing now. So these are just examples of my older work. It's really gritty, really not as built up. You know, images that were a little bit more based in reality in some ways, in terms of the color toning, the gritty feel, the more photographic feel to them. And you know what, Lily? I'm going to make t-shirts of my stick head photo. And I'm going to like tell everybody that if you don't buy one, then we can't be friends. That's what I'm going to do. Okay. So Duncan just asked, do you ever want to revisit an old photo and reshoot it? Yeah, I do. And I have. In fact, the first image that I ever created, I remade a decade later, and to see what that would look like. And that's all documented on my Flickr site, if you want to check that out. But yeah, I do. I reshoot, and it doesn't happen often though, because what I try to do instead of just reshooting an exact concept is I'll revisit images that I love something about. So it might be the theme or the concept, the idea. It might be the location or a piece of wardrobe or a color. And I'll just ask myself, now how can I update that today? Like how can I run with that thing that I loved from this image, but make it mine now? Because I am not the same person that I was then. And it's always important to know that. Yeah. I just love reading your comments. Okay. Robert, we'll send it to charity. We'll make stickhead t-shirts for charity. I think we've got a good thing going on here. So Alessandra says, I noticed that you seldom show your face. It feels rebellious since most portraits show a face, with the exception of Shaden Monster and the Brooke wand, of course. I need to read these comments before I read them out loud. Yeah. You were branching out with your photos. This is gold. Yeah, that's true. So let me talk about that, because If you have not done self-portraits or you feel self-conscious about them, one really good way to get out of your head is to not show your face or to cover up certain parts of your body that you don't feel comfortable with. And we're going to talk about this in a second. For me, not showing my face was partly because I'm not an actor. I don't want to have to emote with my face in my images. That's just not what I want to be doing. So I didn't show my face. But what occurred to me very soon after I made that choice is that images are more sellable and more relatable when you don't show a face in fine art. Not all the time. There are tons of exceptions. But for me, that's been my reality, is that when there's no face, people can see whoever they want in that image, and it allows a greater audience to connect to it. So I usually don't show my face. Okay. And so that's the full image that I made there for this shot, which I made this in 2009. And then a couple of years ago, people started sending me pictures of the bent neck lady or something. I don't even know, but I started hearing all this stuff, and I want to reach out to the show makers of whatever show that was. Okay. When the world settles down, will you be traveling and doing more live art shows? Yes, Wayne, yes. I actually have a solo show coming up in June in Colorado, and then another one in September with this new body of work that I'm putting out, so that'll happen really soon, actually. I don't know if I'll be able to travel for it, but my prints are going places. Yeah, it's been a bummer. So these are... These are some of slightly newer images, not from 10 or 11 years ago, from the past few years. And I wanted to share some images that I've made in more recent times that just really resonate with me, that are some of my absolute favorites, that I really connect with. And maybe you do as well. So these are two of them, both with a very similar concept, with all of these hands. They are both self-portraits. They're my hands and me in the photos, and I always found these two really interesting to pair. One person facing away, being held together, sort of, another person facing forward, almost being pulled down or pushed up. And there's a lot of to me a lot of room to explore in self-portraiture when it comes to topics that you feel personally motivated by or interested in or curious about. So for this particular image, I love this idea of how you can never really truly know if somebody is trying to pull you down or lift you up, and things change and that might look different over time. It's just a concept that I love, that I have explored in my personal life, so I decided to translate that to images. And I often feel when I do shoots with clients or with models that I just didn't have the experience that I wanted, and it's because I didn't get to play that character. And yet, I have been that character for years thinking about the topic of the photo. I don't know if that makes sense, but for me, that's just, there's a real disconnect there. And so, actually, about 80% of my entire portfolio is self-portraiture. And about 7 years ago, I moved from Los Angeles to Arizona. And I don't know anybody here, pretty much at all. And that is very intentional. So I work by myself, and I have pretty much exclusively worked by myself for the past 7 years. And so now 98% of my work is self-portraiture. Let's see. Okay, just looking over at the chat. How did you make that dress movement on the broken neck shot? So Louise, my process is so simple. I just took the dress and threw it. Just flicked it to the side, and that's it. And I just did it until I got a shape that I really liked. That particular dress was super lightweight, so it really flowed very beautifully. But that's all I ever do. I don't use fans or any assistance or anything like that. I just took the dress and flicked it and then added it on to the shot of me in the frame. That's how I do pretty much everything. So for all of these images, it was just me laying with my camera, and then I took the shot, and then I took extra pictures of my hand coming toward the camera, and I did that a whole bunch of times and then edited them together. Okay. So Nicole says, I want to create a self-portrait that makes a statement about who I am, but I'm having trouble coming up with a concept. Can you give me some advice for sparking creativity? Yes. So here are a couple of things that I would do, that I do regularly. One is a little bit of a hippie thing, but just bear with me. I like to do creative daydreams every single day. So for 1 minute every single day, I just imagine that I'm like walking through a story, that I'm a character in a story. And it can be whatever you want. You just imagine that you're in a totally random place, and that, you imagine what you're wearing and what it smells like and what it looks like. And then you just go somewhere or something happens. You just force yourself to imagine every day for at least a minute. I would recommend starting with 5 minutes and see if you can make it through without like just feeling like you're dying, but just give it a try and see if it works. But the real concrete thing that I do is I always work from theme. So if I were you, I would write down some words that really resonate with you right now, that you feel a personal connection to. It might be growth or transformation or heaviness or darkness or decay, or now we're getting into my words, but write down words that you feel connected to, that represent who you are right now, and then almost do like a mind map with it. Maybe like circle the word that you feel most connected to that you wrote down, and then start to write down corresponding visuals to that word. So like if you write down transformation, maybe a visual that comes to my mind is butterflies, and so maybe that starts to spark visual ideas. So that's how I work. Oops, I pulled my headphone out. That's how I work, and that's how I work for almost every single image that I've ever made. Is I start with theme, I come up with that central core word that really resonates, and then I start to create visuals around that word. Okay. Right, the focus. Oh, I think I talked about that. So for these images, they were shot with autofocus. It's pretty easy to use autofocus. Like if your camera does autofocus and it has a decent autofocus in it, then all you need is a remote. And I think I have my remote right here. I know you're probably not gonna be able to see it because I'm just a little box, but that's my remote. I use a Sony A7R4 camera and a 3-legged thing tripod. I will just try to type that here so you can see that. Oh boy. Okay. 4 and 3-legged thing tripod. And my remote is an RMT DSLR2 remote. Okay, so that's the main equipment that I'm using. Oh, I also use a 24 to 70 millimeter Sony lens. Okay. And so that's the main equipment that I'm using. I'm not saying that because I think that you need to have the same setup. I think that pretty much anything works, and I have used other cameras over the years, but that is my setup of choice, and I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of it. So when I focus my images, I just have to use my remote and click the 2-second timer. And then I have 2 seconds to dispose of my remote and pose, and it's always going to autofocus on me, especially because Sony has eye tracking. So if I'm facing the camera, it will try to focus on my eye, which I know a lot of people find very important, though I personally do not. Okay, so moving on to just some more images. These were actually created quite a while ago. The left one was created 5 years ago, and the right one was created like 8 or 9 years ago. And they're still some of my favorites that really resonate with me, because I see a lot of power in both of these images, and that's something that I really like to explore in my life, is what are the ways that I can portray power and that I can embody that power that I want to portray so much. So I've done that with a red dress that's flowing on top of a mountain. I've done that with this really dark scene, but I'm bringing the light into the dark. And that's where concept really is king for me, because I am thinking about the idea first and foremost, so that at the end of the image, when I finish it and somebody views it, that word will resonate. You'll see that word or that phrase that I'm trying to get you to see. So that's my greatest hope. Favorite image that I've created? Yes, I will show it to you in just a second. Okay. So this left image was made in 2009. So this was a really old image, but I wanted to share that that year, I ended up doing a lot of shoots with a friend that I made. Her name is Olivia. She's amazing. I met her in my apartment building, and we started shooting together, and I made a lot of images with her when I first started out, and a lot of self-portraits as well, because I made 100 images my first year. But a lot of them were with her, and I started to put together a portfolio, and I went to galleries, and I started to submit, some images. And I met with a gallery, and I brought them this image and 9 others for them to sift through and look at. And they ended up saying that they didn't like any of them except for the self-portrait, because they loved that it was a self-portrait and they loved that there was so much action and motion in it. And that's something that I feel like I'm able to achieve a lot of the time, that it's really difficult to work with models, because finding fine art models is a whole different ballgame to finding fashion models and stuff like that, which are much more readily available. So when I photograph people, I only use my friends, because they don't have ideas already of what modeling should be, and I find that I can break them easier. But I prefer to do self-portraits. So this image on the left is the very first image that I ever showed in a gallery. I made a whole entire series based on that image, and they were all self-portraits. The one on the right is a newer image of mine that I just really love, and I think that they go really well together, and those are some of my favorites. I also am kind of able to create really dark work without having to explain myself. I know that a lot of people say that they try to work with others on dark images and they just don't get it and they think that you're weird. I don't have that problem because I'm just alone all the time. So I'm creating these images by myself with no one to judge me until I release them on the internet, of course. And so these are a couple of images that are two of my absolute favorite images, partly because I think that they really emotionally impact people, and partly because like I feel the pain of what this would feel like when I look at them, and I love when an image makes me physically feel something. Okay. Do all cameras have the ability for a remote? Pretty much, yeah. It's really like highly unlikely that you will get a camera that can't take a remote. You just have to look up your camera brand and see which one is compatible, but yeah, should be totally fine. The most demanding or emotional picture that I've created. That's a really interesting question, Robert. I'll have to think about that as we go, because I tend not to create from a place of darkness. So I create dark images, but I don't create from a place of darkness. I'm a highly analytical person. So I have a couple answers to that. One is that it doesn't happen very often because I only create after I'm outside of a situation and I've analyzed it. But there was an image that I made a couple of years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, where a friend of mine was pregnant. She was 8 months pregnant, and we went to this abandoned building. And the night before, I gathered like all of this ash from fireplaces, like campfires and stuff, and we filled this room with ash. And I had like a light coming in the window, and it was really cinematic and beautiful. And I had like a baby cradle, an antique cradle, in the corner of the room, and she was nude, wearing a veil over her face and pregnant. And I asked her if she would be comfortable bringing her father's ashes to the photo shoot, and she did, and we wiped the ashes on her face to create the image. And that was probably the most poignant emotional photo shoot that I've done, just recognizing the gravity of that moment. But for me, those moments tend to come from other people rather than from myself. So that's kind of weird. Okay. I'll keep showing. So this image on the left is my favorite image that I've ever created, I think. And that might surprise you because it's really simple. But that's kind of why I love it. I know how to composite, and I know how to create like lots of things going on and, all of that. But for me, the greatest joy is in the simple images and in creating images that have high impact but without a lot to look at. So this is a self-portrait that I made in my bedroom, really simply, just window light and a wall, nothing else. I covered my body in white paint, and then I had this little paper butterfly that I photographed all over. And that was definitely one of the best moments, I think, in my career, which is like really weird. Nothing happened. I just felt so much resonance with that image. And then the one on the right is just, I've just always loved the playfulness of this image, and not a lot of my images have that vibe, but this one really did. Raf says, how did you first start selling your images, and were you ever afraid of them being rejected? Yeah, and they were, like, hundreds of times, and still are. I get rejections a lot. Like, a lot. Like, I think that you would be surprised at how often. And that's because I put myself out there all the time. I'm constantly submitting to things. I submitted to over 100 galleries my first year and only got one show out of it. and only like 5 responses, and 4 of them were no. So yeah, I've had a lot of rejections. I want to start selling mine, but I'm not sure where or how to start, and I'm nervous. Yeah, I mean, it's a nerve-wracking thing, right? But go online, go on websites like callforentry.org, Lens Culture, Lens Scratch. Those are all great websites to check out, and look for call for entries. Like, look to see if there are juried shows. Just submit, because the thing is that like juries don't remember your work. People are always like, what if I submit and they remember me and they hate me and whatever, and they just won't. Like, they just won't, because I've been on tons of juries. Nobody remembers. So don't worry about it. I mean, like, I know that it's kind of depressing to say that you're just one person in a sea of people, but it's true. So there's nothing really to worry about. Like, nothing that bad is going to happen. So just go for it. Are you using Instagram filters on some of these pictures? No. No, I have worked for many, many, many years to develop a very distinct visual style. And so we'll go over some of that in just a bit. I better get moving here, you guys. Okay. All right. I'm just going to keep moving on. So again, some of my favorite images that I wanted to share with you, created many years apart, but I feel like they have a good visual flow. Okay. So let me get into some notes that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to look away from the questions just for a couple minutes here. The first thing that I wanted to share was this ability of self-portraiture to transform who you are and what you do and how you think. And there's a lot to talk about when it comes to transformation, and really all of what we're talking about is transformation. Because when I first started self-portraiture, I didn't do it because like I wanted to go on some deep spiritual journey. I just did it for convenience. I just wanted to do something and I didn't want to talk to people, so I just did it. But what I've learned is that there is a deep transformation that occurs when you focus on the self, and that's what it forces you to do, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. So for me, it was convenience. That's the first reason why I started self-portraiture. It was just easy. Like, I could just do it without anybody judging me and without having to talk to people. I'm antisocial. Like, I would prefer not to ever talk to people in person. So I really treasured that experience. It is a great way to pursue experimentation, to do things that you don't want to, fail or let a whole team down doing. Just do it by yourself and see how it looks, and then see if you can, progress from there. It's a great way to document your life. So, like, I don't do documentary photography at all. Like, not even at all. I don't have an eye for photography in the traditional sense. So for me, it's not about documenting my day-to-day, but I can see the transformation that I've been on. I can remember days of my life that I would have otherwise forgotten. And it's a really awesome way of just remembering, just making yourself the center of the story that you're creating. It's a great way to sort of focus on body image. I'm a big proponent of body neutrality and, letting go of your need to please yourself with your body. But, whatever your stance is on that, it's a great way to grow in your own skin and to learn about yourself and to overcome obstacles that you might find. And then further, it's just a way to explore. It's a way to learn more and to follow your curiosity and to just get out there and try some things that you wouldn't have otherwise tried. I wrote this phrase today because it just really sat well with me, this idea that self-portraiture can help us find deeper soil for our roots. What we need to do is dig deeper and deeper and deeper, because we are all either planted in a reality that we've created for ourselves or that we've fallen into, and it's probably kind of a mixture of both. And I think that what the goal should be is that we create a life that we've made for ourselves instead of one that feels made for us. And self-portraiture lets you do that. It lets you be your own boss and make all of your own decisions and grow in confidence in private. And as you do that, and as you explore topics that are important to you, your roots start to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into your own psyche, your own soul, what is important to you, what's not important to you, and it comes out necessarily in your work. I think that it just has to. Of course, self-portraiture is about perspective at the same time. It's about learning about yourself in new ways. It's about seeing yourself literally and figuratively from different angles. Some of them are bad and some of them are good, and some take a huge perception shift, like body image or your own personality. Do you have the patience to do self-portraits? Do you have the patience for all of this? And when you're alone while you create, the experience is drastically different from when you're with other people in the room, because there's no one to make jokes with and hide behind them when you're afraid of doing something. It's just you and there's no one to blame. And that is a really great place to be when you're creating new works. So then it's really just a huge area of unknown. I mean, when you find yourself really alone and you have to make all of the choices by yourself, you realize how much you don't know, and you have to be willing to walk into that unknowing to try to figure out the answers for yourself. I think that there's like a huge issue in the general population with not knowing ourselves deeply and with not being confident in making those choices for ourselves. This is a great way of doing it, is just to learn about yourself through the process of stepping into the unknown. This is a great quote that I love. It says, "You may think I'm small, but I have a universe inside my mind." I have always loved this quote, and I think that it really harkens back to the fact that we all do. We all have a universe inside our minds, and we don't really explore it. I mean, I can't even tell you how many people I have met that have said, "I'm just not a creative person." And then after we've spent time together and I try to train people about ways to be creative, a month later they send me 10 images that they made that month, and they can't believe that they had an imagination all the time. And that's how we all are. And that's why I really try to push self-portraiture on people, not because I think that it's the best art form, but because I think it is the best way of learning about ourselves, and really discovering whatever that is inside of you that needs to come out. I think that that's kind of the best thing that we can do. Are there any Doctor Who fans here? I'm just really curious, because like I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. I don't know if you need to know about how much of a Doctor Who fan I am, but there's this thing in Cardiff in the UK called the Doctor Who Experience, and I've been 5 times. And I've been inside the TARDIS, and I met Matt Smith. Anyway, that's an aside. The point is, this is an awesome quote from Doctor Who. It says, "We are all stories in the end, just make it a good one." And this is, I mean, what better way to make yourself part of a story than to literally document your story, to put yourself at the center of that instead of removing yourself from the process, and seeing what stories evolve around you, revolve around you, and how you can pull them in, pull the stories in that you want and push the ones away that you don't. And I think that's just fantastic. So I wrote this phrase, reconciling your imagination, because you may feel unimaginative, or that you don't have ideas, or that you can't flourish and that nothing will work. And those things will happen. All of those things will happen. You will wake up and want to make something, but you just can't think of what to make. Or you'll have tons of ideas, but no resources. And you will feel like less than, and you will feel not good enough. And that will happen. And you will take images of yourself, and you will hate the way that your body looks, and you will hate the way that your face looks. And you just won't be able to move your hair or your costume in the right way, and nothing will work. And maybe even you'll get home and you'll realize none of your pictures are in focus, which has happened to me so many times I shouldn't even tell you. I used to be really bad with focusing my self-portraits. So my point, though, is that you have to reconcile that. You have to reconcile that you have an imagination and that it will not always translate. And that's okay. I mean, there's no like grand rule that says that if you imagine something, then you have to be able to create it. Some things stay inside and some things come out, and that's okay. And we have to be able to reconcile those things, whatever is in your imagination. And I also just want to make the point that like people always say, I would love to do self-portraits, but they seem really hard. They are. I mean, like art is hard, and it's supposed to be hard, and that's the point of it. And is it really art if it wasn't difficult? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that there is a lot of real true goodness that can be found in going through that process of difficulty and recognizing that it should be hard. Okay. Another quote that I'm in love with from the song It says, "And here for a moment is every place in the world, and ideas are like stars." And I don't know, like if you feel that like in your gut, just please type a comment, because I felt this so deeply when I read this, and I just want to know if you do too. So here for a moment is every place in the world. And that's, I think, the definition of creative flow, is feeling like what's happening right now is everything in the world. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. It's an abstract idea, but when I create self-portraits, I never enter a state of greater creative flow than when I'm creating a self-portrait. For example, I shot this image at sunrise. It was before sunrise. It was super cold. It was not warm out at all. I think it was 20 degrees when I got in that water, and I was frozen. And I stayed in that water for a full 5 minutes, just sitting there in the freezing cold water. And I didn't feel cold at all. I was just making and creating and being there in that present moment. And it felt like everything in the world was right there. And like my ideas were like stars, and I could reach out and touch them. And I think that is the real true gift and joy of self-portraiture, is the ability to totally and 100% be in that moment and recognize that what you want to create is possible in that moment. I really just thought that was a really beautiful quote. And then the song goes on to say, "They fall from the sky, they run round your head, they litter your sleep as they beckon. They'd teach you to fly without wires or thread, they promise if only you'd let them." And I get chills every time I read that, because it's true. Your ideas are trying to get you to make something. And the truth is that we just usually don't. You know, like the amount of people that I've met that would be willing to get in that water, that murky, disgusting, muddy water in 20-degree weather, and sit there to make a self-portrait that may never work out. I don't know that many people that would do it. And I'm not saying that I'm better because I will do it. I'm just saying that I am super in touch with my creativity, ideation, with this idea that ideas are like stars, and that we have to let our ideas guide us into those experiences. And to me, that's what self-portraiture is. A lot of people feel trapped by less. And what I mean by that is trapped by a lack of resources, a lack of money, a lack of experience, a lack of time, a lack of equipment, whatever it may be. And I think that a lot of us feel that we can't create because of that, or we can't create what we want. But here's the thing. If you can create with less, then you can create with anything. Always. And if you can train yourself to do with less, to make with less, to create with less, then whatever you're handed later on will feel like a gift and not like a crutch. And that is where we all should be, I think, to move forward in creating. Just like life in pandemic right now, a lot of us have had our normal resources taken away from us. Can you still create? Can you still make something out of that? And what does that look like for you? So a lot of people have told me that like a self-portraiture is like poor man's art. Like you just make it because like you're what you have, and it's really convenient and you don't have to think about it very much. But I definitely challenge that perception of self-portraiture, because sometimes that's true, and embrace it. Like, yeah, sometimes you are convenient and that's just what you have. Embrace that. But also, who you use as a model should not dictate the validity of your art. And people have constantly tried to make me feel that way. When I first started out, people would say, even galleries sometimes would say, if you want to make a living at this, you can't just shoot yourself. Well, you know what? I've made a living at it, and I just shoot myself, and anything is possible. So don't feel like you have to follow some predetermined path that other people have followed, because it's just not true. So I think that self-portraiture can be sort of a window to your truth, and it doesn't have to be, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But it is an opportunity to showcase the things, the choices that are important to you, the things, the values, the mindsets that are important to you, the messages, the opinions, the topics that you love. And that, I think, that ability to allow a window into yourself is a mark of bravery. I think it's incredibly brave to create self-portraits that speak to who you are as an individual, and then you let people into that world. It's really intimidating, and I totally commend anybody who does it. But equally, self-portraiture can be a lie about yourself and about your life. It doesn't have to reflect your reality. I create images about universal fears, some of which I have never had in my life. And I do that because it's interesting to me. It's fascinating. I get to be a character that confronts those things head on. And I think that is really, really a special way of creating. So if you need to create a self-portrait that's totally a character, nothing to do with you in your real life, I think that's a great place to start to ease yourself in, or just to enjoy. It really, self-portraiture is just a grand leap of faith against criticism, like in so many ways. And I say that because self-portraiture is a scary thing to do. I mean, you're showing off your body, your face, your everything, your gross toenails or whatever it may be. And further, you are inviting people into your life in some way. And even if you're not, people will assume that that's what's happening. I have heard a lot of criticism over the years. Some of it mean, some of it not so mean. It just really depends. But people, have been telling me for a decade that I'm fat and that I'm skinny and that I'm ugly and that I look like a man and that, I've had people do inappropriate things with my pictures. I've been told that I'm talentless, that I'm derivative, that I'm not an artist. And in fact, I had a woman who owns a gallery, a high-end gallery in New York City, tell me to my face that I am not a real artist. And this will happen. People will say things like that, and it will feel even worse when it's a self-portrait. Trust me. But the fact is that self-portraiture will quickly teach you how thick your skin is and how thick you want it to be. When I started out, I did not have thick skin at all. I would lose sleep so many nights over criticism of my work and myself and what I looked like and if I had talent. And I have learned that I didn't want to be that person that couldn't deal with that. I didn't want my work to have to stop because of somebody else's opinion of me. And so now I really try very hard to stand for unapologetic confidence and to create in whatever way you want, whether that's a self-portrait or not, dark or not, something else, it doesn't matter. But it will definitely show you what that looks like. But, self-portraits, and specifically what I do, it lets you create the world that you want to live in. And I made this image about that exact idea, creating the world that you want to live in. Literally, that's what it lets you do. That's the magic of creating self-portraits, is that you can put yourself in whatever frame you wish you lived in. And I think that that's just the most interesting way to create. So I love that. It is important, I think, that we as self-portrait artists lead with vulnerability, that we recognize that there is so much to say about ourselves and about the world and about, whatever your place is in that. And it can be hard to deal with that criticism. But if you can lead with vulnerability and you can say, look, I'm letting you in. This is hard for me. This is a difficult thing to talk about or create. I don't like my body, but I'm doing it anyway. That is how we lead with vulnerability. And leading with vulnerability is what induces action in other people. And I think that that is the greatest gift that we have, especially as a self-portrait artist, is to encourage people to see themselves at the center of their own story. I think that's a really beautiful, beautiful thing. At the same time, it's okay for that not to be okay right now and for you not to be ready for something like that. We just have to give ourselves grace wherever we are, whatever we're going through right now. We have to give ourselves grace. And then the final point that I want to make is to explore. It should be an exploration. That's what self-portraiture is. It's about going into places that only you would go and doing things that only you would do and using yourself in ways that nobody else could be used in front of a camera and making those characters and those decisions for yourself and truly going on an exploration. I made this image just the other day. I think I have it open in Photoshop to look at. And essentially what I did was I decided that I found this tree stump on a walk with my son and I stuck him in the hole and I was like, yeah, I got to do something with that. And And I did. So I went back 3 times to shoot this. I kept messing it up. I went when there was too much sun. I went at a different time. Finally got it right. Then I shot this image. And it's an exploration. It's about being willing to go out and explore and see how you can interact with the world around you, or how you can create the world around you. And I think that's really special. I wanted to share this image. Let me just... sorry, I'm looking at some of the comments because I missed a lot, and I'm sorry. I knew that I would do that. Right, Doctor Who. Who's your favorite Doctor? Well, you know, I think that Matt Smith is like my Doctor, but David Tennant, I mean, come on, it's David Tennant. Okay. Oh, you guys, I love these comments. Thank you so much. Okay. I'll keep going here for just a second. So I just wanted to share how this particular image was made. So I want to take a look at that. That's how it started. I'm a fairly lazy shooter, just so you know. So like I often have things all over the frame that I have to get out later. So that's how it started. And then I moved myself to this backdrop because I thought it was cleaner, less distracting. Really? Joey, John fan. I'm surprised. Okay, cool. So I moved myself to this space. I got rid of the background a little bit because I thought it was too distracting even still. I added a sky because I really liked those clouds, and I thought that it added this dynamic sort of interest right to the crown area that I liked. I photographed, so there's some hair, got my dress a little bit darker, and then I photographed fire, and I did that separately, and I added the fire in from actual shots of the crown on fire. Little pieces of paper that I lit on fire, always nerve-wracking, especially in the state of Arizona. And then I added in a whole bunch of overlays that were a mixture of salt and dust and a bunch of like things that I could sprinkle in front of my camera. And some of them I left white, and some of them I turned black, and I added that in to be sort of like ash floating around the frame. And then I worked on my color toning and letting the subject stand out. So I'm going to just get Photoshop open here. Okay. And I wanted to share some recent images that I made. So these are all from this year. And what I want to do is just break them down in Photoshop and just talk a little bit about what that was like. So Adriana says, did you have a hard time learning how to use Photoshop? Yes, I am still having a hard time learning how to use Photoshop, to be clear. I am not, like, if you want to find somebody who knows everything about Photoshop, I am not that person, like, to the nth degree. I know how to do very, very limited things in Photoshop, but I know how to do those things well, and I know how to use my imagination to make them work for me. I'll share some of what I mean in a second. Okay. All right. Sorry, just looking to make sure. Seth, that is so cool. That's really cool. Okay. So here's this image. Let's go to the bottom. We're just gonna, take all the layers off. This is kind of in my backyard. I have a lot of acres across the street from me that's just national forest land. So I wanted to share what that looks like. This was my frame. I just love this rock. And I go there every day. We climb it every single day. It's a very little rock. It's not like a huge thing, but we just like to sit on top of there. And so that was my original frame, was just this. I mirrored the frame. So you can see this part is just what was over here, moved over. And so that was my starting point, but I knew when I shot it that I wasn't going to keep the trees. So whatever, was happening here, that was going to get taken away no matter what, because it was just too distracting looking for me. So I got rid of it by painting a fog layer in just with the brush tool. And then I added myself in. I shot myself on the rock. I was really there, right there in that spot. I stuck myself in. as you shoot, a lot of times with self-portraiture, like if you're shooting without a self-portrait, you're shooting somebody else, it's so easy to just change your settings as you go. But when you get into the flow of shooting a self-portrait, you just forget like that it's getting darker outside. And so it was getting darker and darker. And that's why I look so dark compared to the rock because I shot the rock first and myself second. So here are all these layers that are going to pop on. And what you're seeing right now are like little shadows and little markings that will make sense in a second. So I photographed this rope, darkened it down, did that a bunch of times, and wanted to make it look like it was going through my skin. So that is what is happening here. And I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see I've got it like entering my dress. And so you might think, well, you know how to use Photoshop because you made it look like it's going through her skin. No, I don't. I'm just using the dodge and burn tools. Literally, that is all I'm doing. Just using dodge and burn to create highlights and shadows to create a 3D pop effect so that it looks like the rope is going through my skin and my dress. And that's why I said, like, I'm not a Photoshop whiz, but I know how to make it work for me. I use conventional tools in unconventional ways. So that's kind of like my favorite thing, is to create like that. Color toning, just choosing my color palette, giving it more contrast. I love adding texture in, and I have free textures on my blog if you want to grab them. They're on promotingpassion.com. They're totally free, so just take them and use them and do whatever you want with them. My process is largely, and we'll talk about this in other images, largely about creating that singular color palette and then figuring out how you can make that really cohesive in the work. Here's another image really similarly done. Same exact technique, just a different application. And I thought that would be fun to look at. Oh boy, just standing in my office with a bed sheet hung up. And there you can see the dodge and burn tools. Literally just dodge and burn. Totally. Nothing else. I promise you. Nothing else. Really, really simple. And you're just going to see that color being added to those areas and some highlights, some shadows. There's a different head because, felt like I needed that. And all these shadows are coming in before the actual braids. So I photographed my braids and added those in. And I did that separately, of course. And so they're all just being added until it looks realistic. And that's kind of why I like to plan things ahead of time, because I don't like getting into Photoshop and feeling like I don't know where I'm going with something. I like to get into Photoshop and feel really secure that I know the next step of how to make my vision come to life. And that's why planning is so, so important to me. There we go. And that's that for that image. Here's this bird cage image, which is probably going to be a really funny look. Oops. Throw that layer away. So it started with a field. I just shoot fields all the time. I don't have a background in art specifically. I have a background in film, which I guess is a type of art, but it was a much more... It's hard to describe my film program, but there wasn't a lot of art history and no art theory. Like, it wasn't like we learned about colors or Photoshop or like things like that. It's kind of a different experience. So yeah, film is my background. I have a degree in filmmaking and I have a degree in English. So those are my two, English literature. Those are my two things. Okay, so there's my backdrop, creating a shadow where the bird cage will be, creating another fog layer. And there I am. I shot myself in my office. I'm missing my arms, as you can see, because I added different arms on from a different shot. And there's the other one because I wanted to be holding on to the bars. So you can see in the original image, I wasn't holding anything. I just had my hands positioned in a way that I felt like might wrap around the bars. And then I put the bird cage in, which I had to totally mask out because the original cage was on a dark maroon backdrop. It's a long story. But that's what I had. So I used it. So I masked out the entire bird cage. Don't you feel like I should win a prize for that? Like, just sorta. It was really hard. I did not enjoy it. There's some more dress being added in to create flow and motion, changing the colors. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I went back and forth on that. So even when I have something planned, like my original plan was to create a blue dress to be like a blue jay, and I just didn't like it. I just didn't like how it looked. Adding in some more fog with that brush tool. This is a smoke layer that I added in by photographing a smoke emitter. And then just really brightening it up and figuring out what I wanted the color palette to be in this particular image. So 2 more left. This one I said that we would look at, which I showed you in the presentation. Again, just a field. That's how a lot of my images start. I changed the color of the field because I wanted there to be a super cohesive color palette, that being purple and blue. So I changed the green to be purple. There are the relevant shadows that you'll see coming in for that. And so that was my lovely tree stump that I photographed. And I'm changing the color of my dress, making it blue. I did that by selecting it and using curves. Making it brighter, adding contrast, adding my little birdies in, and the final 2 changes there. And that's where I ended up in this image. The next one that I am going to open is this one, and nobody has seen this yet. This is like, I don't even know why I decided to show this. It just felt right because I wanted to show you how incredibly absurd self-portraiture is. And also that I think as you go on in your self-portrait journey, it's easier to become okay with not looking beautiful or handsome, not, like looking like the coolest person. And that's what I totally embraced in this image, which is like an incredibly unflattering set of images. But this is part of my brand new series that I haven't shown anyone yet. It's called Samsara, and this is a self-portrait that I did based on the idea of death masks and how it used to be fashionable to create masks of dead people even before people died so that they could have their own mask ahead of time. And I wanted to create that for this image. So that's how it started. I did have some assistance here. I hung up a black sheet. I cut a little hole in it and I stuck my head through, and then I had my husband pour paint all over me. And that's what I did for all of these images here. I got rid of, the unnecessary arms. And then after I had it all tightened up, I got rid of the color from all of them but one. And then did some transforming to fix the shape of my head because the fabric was covering my forehead weird. And that's kind of it. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. And I'm so grateful for you for sticking with me all this time. I know that it was a little bit long, but hopefully you enjoyed it. And hopefully I got to answer lots of your questions as I went. Lena says, do you ever, do your images ever get too large in Photoshop? All the time, constantly. I have a lot of PSBs saved instead of PSDs because my files are usually over 2 gigabytes. So yes. Yeah, he doesn't, Robert. Okay. So I think that I'm gonna hang it up then, you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm so appreciative. I'm just an email away. If you ever need anything, you can find my email on my website, brookeshaden.com, or you can just ping me on social media. I'm just at Brooke Shaden on Instagram. So if you want to say hello there, that's awesome. Thank you to Adorama for doing this and for inviting me. It's a huge honor. I'm so grateful. So that's it. I'm gonna hang it up if I can remember how. Thank you guys so much. Bye.